On to some financial news now. Bank of America has agreed to pay more than $10 billion to mortgage giant Fannie Mae to settle claims of mortgages gone bad, dealing mostly with loans issued by Countrywide. And it was all the big news today.
Bank of America has reached a settlement with Fannie Mae to resolve claims related to residential mortgage loans.
$10.3 billion is what Bank of America owes Fannie Mae, roughly $7 billion in loans it will buy back.
So it's going to pay $3.6 billion to Fannie Mae. It's going to buy back about $6.7 billion in loans that it and its Countrywide banking unit sold to Fannie Mae.
Now, in addition to this settlement, 10 major U.S. banks and mortgage companies came to another agreement today after months of back and forth haggling with federal regulators over improper actions related to foreclosures across this country. We're talking about banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, also Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, PNC Financial Services. Now, the big banks agreed to pay $8.5 billion to make up for widespread abuse that led to thousands of Americans being forced out of their homes, when they, in fact, should have been allowed to keep those homes. Now, here's a little bit of a breakdown for you. $3.3 billion will go directly to eligible homeowners who were foreclosed upon in 2009 and 2010, and $5.2 billion will be used as assistance in loan modifications and reductions of principal balances. Now, despite settlements like these today, and another one in 2011, the foreclosure crisis is far from over, and in some cases continues to get worse. To talk more about this, Anthony Randazzo, Director of Economic Research at the Reason Foundation. Hey there, Anthony. You're joining us from Los Angeles, is that right?
I'm out in LA today, normally on the East Coast, but today enjoying the sunny Southern California.
California, of course, a place that has seen a record number of foreclosures. So let's talk about this. This is being touted as a major multi-billion-dollar settlement, but critics call it nothing more than another big win for the big banks. I want to get your take here.
Well, I actually sort of see this as it's win-win-win all the way around. The bank's definitely a win here because the cost of the independent review of the going through each individual foreclosure to see whether or not it was improper or not was costing them a lot of money. But what they were finding was that actually there was not as many improper foreclosures as originally thought. And a lot of the practices that have been highly criticized, the regulators were finding that it wasn't as many as originally perceived. So the regulators also kind of wanted to get out of this because they'd found most of the problems they thought they were going to find. So it's a win for the regulators. And I think consumers win here too because we need to move past the litigation portion of getting out of the crisis to actually begin to create some certainty for financial institutions that they know what their costs are going forward so they can actually engage in lending again.
You know what, Anthony, let me get in here because that is an excuse used time and time again. We've heard it by the president. We've heard it by so many leaders here in this country who say, you know, let's just leave that harsh past behind us so we can move on, so we can begin to heal. But the fact is, so many of these banks have not been held responsible. And $8.5 billion may sound like a lot of money, but between, you know, these 10 to 12 banks, it's not that much. And some of these people who were kicked out of their homes, you know, might see up to $125,000. But the fact is, the amount of money that people lost here because of this mismanagement doesn't come close to what's being paid out.
Well, Christine, I couldn't agree with you more. The idea that people were forced improperly out of their homes violates everything that really America stands for, the rule of law and private property rights. The problem is that the whole process, this whole litigation process, hasn't really been focused on those individuals. If you look at this deal that the 10 banks are signing on to, the deal that was signed in 2011, in February 2011, and even Bank of America's deal, a lot of this money is going towards homeowners today that are struggling to make their payments and not previous borrowers. The reason why I think that we need to actually sort of close the books on this and actually move forward is because this allows for money to actually be given to people who were improperly foreclosed on. The regulators have been pushing and digging to try and find all of the people that really were improperly foreclosed on, and what they've sort of determined is that they think that they've found all of them, or at least most of them, and that they can create a pool of money from this settlement to then be able to distribute some some of that money to those individuals.
It's really interesting when we talk about sort of what's been going on over the last few years to try to right these wrongs. Some new programs have been sort of set up to deal with this. So I want to look at one of them, and this was brought up in an investigation by ProPublica, the major program set up to deal, with that promise that the government made of compensating victims of the crisis. This is a program called the Independent Foreclosure Review, and according to ProPublica, they found out it really isn't that independent at all. Some of the banks themselves actually had a hand in conducting some of these reviews. Talk about this aspect of it, Anthony. I mean, what seems to be here mounting evidence of the banks deliberately not changing their ways.
Well, you've got two things that are going on in this whole discussion of foreclosures. We've got the people today who are struggling to make payments and are looking at foreclosures, and that's the foreclosure wave that's getting worse, that's going to get worse this year, that you were mentioning sort of the top. And then we've got people who were possibly were improperly foreclosed on, and that's the independent review that you're talking about. And these are people that were improperly foreclosed on or potentially in 2009 and 2010. And that independent review was costing a lot of money. The banks actually were really involved in it, and it really wasn't that independent, and it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. This settlement it basically replaces that whole process, and it creates a pool of money that will be distributed to any victims that have eligible claims to actually be able to make the payments out, as opposed to one-by-one processes that were taking months and months and even up to years, costing money that was going to consultants as opposed to the victims. So I think that replacing the program is a good idea. Whether or not this replacement is the best of the replacements, what is sort of like up for debate. A lot of the details haven't been released, but the critiques that ProPublica found, I think, were really accurate. Getting rid of the independent review was a good step.
I want to talk about just sort of what we're seeing today in this country regarding foreclosures and take a look at some hard numbers here. This is according to Realty Track. From January 2006 to October of 2012, there were about 10 million foreclosure starts. About half of those actually ended up being foreclosures. And as of the end of the year, just last week really, December 2012, there were 14 million underwater homeowners. Let me just get from you real quick, Anthony, the story behind these numbers.
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen is as people have not been able to make payments over months and months and months, they get to this point of why continue to put money into a home that I just am not I'm not going to have any equity in, so I probably just want to walk away from it. And as that has continued, as we've gotten further away from the crisis, we've seen more and more people walk away from their homes. So with housing prices continuing to stay low because we were in a housing bubble, and we're not going to go back to that housing bubble, homeowners are beginning to realize that we're just not going to go back to 2006 prices. We're going to have a lot of these homes that are just going to remain underwater, and as a result, there's incredible fears that in 2013 and going into 2014, that sort of mentality of I'm just never going to have any equity in this home, why continue to pay in a home that's going to remain underwater, will set in for more and more people, and we'll see an increase in the number of people walking away from their homes and therefore foreclosures.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Anthony Randazzo, Director of Economic Research.